evening, folks. Good evening. Welcome to the third annual Charley Steiner Symposium on Sports Communication. I am Tony Adams, Chair and Professor of Communication at Bradley University. The department that houses the Charley Steiner School of Sports Communication, a school named, of course, in honor of Bradley alum, Emmy Award winner, and World Series announcer Charley Steiner. The Steiner School of Sports Communication is the first and only named school of sports communication in the nation. The mission of the Steiner School is to recognize sports as a major global, economic, and cultural force, integrate the academic study of sports communication with professional education and experiential learning, and educate students to think, act, and communicate effectively, ethically, creatively, and critically in sports context. The Charley Steiner Symposium on Sports Communication, one of the annual events of the Steiner School, is made possible by Charley's generous financial gift, as well as his vast and honorable reputation. I'd like to thank our sponsor this evening, Paul Herzog and Mass Mutual.
Anytime I can share space, when I was on campus, and he took over the student center, and then went on to win Emmys, I'm proud to be part of it.
And Dean King is here, and he helped bail me out. God bless you, Dean King.
And just yet, I want to give some brief introductions to tonight's panelists. First, we have legendary Peabody and Emmy Award-winning Hall of Fame broadcaster Larry King, who will moderate tonight's panel. Mr. King has interviewed more than 60,000 people over a 60-year career. He began in 1957 as a disc jockey in Miami, where he hosted 2 afternoon newscasts and a sportscast. Mr. King's interviews have made headlines and sometimes history with some of the biggest newsmakers in politics, religion, entertainment, and business. Currently, he hosts Larry King Now and Politicking with Larry King, produced and distributed by Aura TV and Hulu. Jim Miller has worked in politics, media, and entertainment for more than 20 years. He is the author of numerous best-selling books, including Those Guys Have All the Fun, Inside the World of ESPN, and Live from New York, An Uncensored History of Saturday Night Live, a book Fortune magazine named as one of the 75 smartest books we know. Mr. Miller has worked as Vice President of Television for Norman Lear's Act III Communication, Executive Vice President of Original Programming for USA Network, and Senior Executive Producer for Anderson Cooper 360. And of course, we have Charley Steiner, 5-time Emmy Award winner, Radio Hall of Famer, play-by-play announcer for the National League champion Los Angeles Dodgers. He spent 14 years with ESPN, and in addition to the Dodgers, has called play-by-play for the New Jersey Generals, the New York Jets, and the New York Yankees. He is also one of our own, a Bradley alum, a Bradley Sports Hall of Famer, a member of the Centurion Society, a recipient of an honorary doctorate, and one of Bradley's fiercest advocates. Now please join me in welcoming Larry, Jim, and Charley to Bradley, where they will discuss the rise and fall of ESPN.
You know, let me jump in before I pass it on to Larry. You know, when we're kicking around ideas each year, one of the joys of my year is the symposium. And we had, I don't know, 8 or 9 panels today, and they were all wonderful. And we were talking about, Jim Miller and I were talking about it months ago, and he said, hey, what do you think? I said, come on out. And when I said, well, we could talk about kind of like the rise and fall of ESPN, and it's not exactly what I had in mind, but rather where ESPN is now as compared to where it was then. So I don't want to suggest that they are heading anywhere other than where they are now. It's just a different time, a different place. It's one of the things I think I can talk about during my 14 years. I've been away from there 15 years, and I watch it as a consumer as you do. And so the headline, rise and fall, is a little hefty, a little misleading, but again, at the end of the night, Jim knows more about ESPN than I ever will. He knows more about ESPN during the time I was there than I ever did. And of course, he wrote a wonderful best-selling book, which you could buy at a local bookstore anytime now. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way because I was a little, I didn't mean it to sound like rise and fall, like they're heading into oblivion. They're not, they're doing fine. But it is a totally different animal than it was when I arrived in '88. And with that, hello. Hello, Larry. There was a TV show named Hello.
Hi, Charlie. How you doing?
Hey, pal.
All right, Jim, picking right up from that, is the term fall premature?
I think it depends how you define it. Look, ESPN still brings in a ton of money, over $11 billion in revenue to parent company Disney. They're still, by far, the biggest in what they do. But in the last 3 years, they've lost over 11 million subscribers. People have somehow decided that if they don't use it, they don't want to pay for it. And so there's been a lot of what we call cord cutting. My mother's never put on ESPN on her TV in her life, but ESPN still gets over $7 per household.
So why do they fire so many people?
That's because two things are happening. They're losing subscribers, and they're having to pay more and more money for all these live events that they're putting on. The ESPN has spent over $25 billion on college football over the last nearly a decade. Things are very expensive.
When I started CNN and ESPN started about the same time, right?
Yes.
CNN started 1980 and ESPN 79.
September 7th, 1979.
And CNN June 1st, 1980. I joined them June 1st, 1985. But Ted Turner always told me that CNN was healthier because it didn't have to pay for any certain, they went to cover a war. You didn't have to pay the enemy to cover the war.
Right, except for the fact that ESPN was also getting a ton of money from the cable companies. So they had a dual revenue stream that CNN really didn't have.
Well, Ted got a lot of money. Of course, he was carried on so many carriers, and they were paying him 50 cents. Anyway, they're both making a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Charlie, you worked there for many years, and we've discussed this a lot. Are they going down because of competition, the nature of the internet, or the quality of the broadcast?
I think the biggest issue facing ESPN and any kind of live network, they don't know how to counter-program against a telephone. I think it's as simple as that. In the years that I did SportsCenter with Bob Lee and Robin Roberts at 6 o'clock Eastern Time, and Keith Olbermann and Dan Patrick would do their show at 11 o'clock. When you got home at the end of the day, you turned on SportsCenter. What did I miss while I was working? So they would turn us on, and they would watch, and they'd watch the highlights and watch the stories. And even more so at night with Keith and Dan with the highlights of the games. But now, you have that information in your pocket immediately. So it's no longer necessarily appointment television, as it once was. And we were very lucky that we did not have the competition of the internet and the iPhone and all of that. And so as a result, folks did not necessarily have to come home and watch and who won, who lost that day or that night. I think that's probably the number one hurdle that ESPN and any other kind of programming where it's against the telephone. At some point, we're going to get buzzed tonight, who won, who lost in Virginia. And then at CNN, MSNBC, Fox, people will already have known that. So now, SportsCenter, which again was part of the fabric and the culture of ESPN, and as a result, part of Americana, it serves a different purpose now. And so how they, ESPN and the others, counter-program against the immediacy of a cell phone, that's their dilemma.
But present company excluded, because I don't want you to boast yourself, has the quality diminished?
Well,
come on.
Probably. I leave that for others. We were very fortunate at a time when I arrived, when SportsCenter was trying to reinvent itself. I got there in '88. And by, I guess, what, 1990, 91, Bob and I were together, Bob Lee, and then Robin Roberts joined us. And so at 6 o'clock every night, you had Bob Lee, the general, who's still there and outside the lines, and he is the quintessential example of a sports journalist, broadcast sports journalist. Robin Roberts, of course, Good Morning America, and I do whatever I do. That was a pretty good threesome. Then you have Keith Olbermann and Dan Patrick. That was a pretty good duo. And then on the overnight shift, we had people like Mike Tirico and Chris Fowler and Linda Cohn. That was, quote unquote, the bench strength. We just happened to be there at a time when it all kind of came together with a lot of talented people. And I will leave that to others to determine, are we as good as or not quite as good as what they trot out there to now?
Why are they all trying to be funny?
Well,
I mean, they're not funny.
in part because of what Charlie said about the phone, because what's the value proposition of SportsCenter right now to the audience? If we don't need them to give us the scores, you know, it's funny, when Keith and Dan were doing the 11 o'clock, if you go back and look at it, they'll say, and coming up next, we'll tell you who won the Giants-Padre game. Geez, I get the score every inning. I know every single out. I don't have to wait for a commercial. I don't have to turn it on, as Charlie was saying. So what they've decided is that it's all about personality. In a way, Scott Van Pelt's show at night, the SportsCenter show, is a little almost like Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon. They're trying to develop personalities because they want you to want to make it appointment television.
They want design programming.
They want, and by the way, whether it makes you car sick or not, that's the theory behind Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, and some of the other personalities that were part of a big part of First Take on ESPN, because college kids with hangovers in front of cold pizza would watch these people yell at each other at the top of their voices and say the most outlandish things to get reactions from each other. And it was 2 hours live, 5 days a week, and all of a sudden, remember something, ESPN has 8,760 hours to fill a year. That's a lot of time. So they put these personalities up there to try and capture an audience, and people want to hang out with them or even argue with them.
Well, personal opinion, though, if you're not funny, don't try to be funny. And they're stretching a little.
Well, easier said than done.
Now, what are your thoughts, both of you, on the story running today and yesterday that Disney, which owns ESPN, is interested in buying 20th Century Fox, which would include Fox News, the Fox Network, which includes a lot of sports, and FS1. What's going on? Is two companies trying to take over the world? Why would Disney want to buy that?
You got me.
Well, Hey,
I'm just a hired hand. You know, let me just interject 1 second about the personalities and SportsCenter and all of that. Journalism is very expensive. Talk is cheap. So you can get a half a dozen hosts to scream at each other all day, fill some of those 8,700 hours, and it's done. But if you are trying to program a show like SportsCenter with sending correspondents out and researching and real journalistic enterprise, that's a hell of a lot of money. When you have those talk shows, it's cost contained. You know exactly what it's going to cost you every year. You're going to pay somebody some amount of money. You got a guy who runs the prompter, you got a couple of cameramen, you got a couple of producers. That's cost contained. But when you are sending correspondents out and you are doing research on great hard-hitting stories, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money. So as far as Fox is concerned, I have no idea.
Why do you think Disney wants to venture into that more?
Well, I'm more curious about why Rupert Murdoch wants to sell. He's got two sons that he's given the company to, and he's had this kind of transition in place for quite some time, and the brothers are actively involved. It's not like he didn't have anybody to turn it over. So I think that's, to me, that was my first reaction. I mean, I think clearly what's happened at Fox News has taken some of the wind at their sails with Roger Ailes and Bill O'Reilly, and there's been a lot of disruption in that company. The other part of it is 21st Century Fox. I mean, the movie business is in intensive care. We can talk about SportsCenter all we want, but it's a problem.
But if Disney is worried about ESPN dwindling audience, and they're buying an industry where movies are down, Fox News is to the right of Attila the Hun, why would they want to buy a sports enterprise if sports is going down because, as Charlie mentioned, the telephone? Why would they even be interested in that?
Well, some of it is, I mean, when John Skipper became president of ESPN, he decided that all he cared about was live. Because forget about SportsCenter, he wanted live rights. I mean, the truth is, if you're Walt Disney, you don't know whether or not a show that could be popular, that's popular now, will be popular 5 years from now, right? So 10 years ago, everybody was talking about Desperate Housewives on Sunday night. And it's one of the reasons why ABC decided not to go for football again. But we don't know Desperate Housewives anymore. The truth is, 5 years from now, we're going to want to watch the Rose Bowl. We don't know who's going to be in it, but there are going to be people who are going to be interested in the Rose Bowl. There'll be people who are going to be interested in the NBA Finals. So John Skipper believes in live rights, which is why he has gone on one of the great shopping sprees of all time. I mean, he makes George Steinbrenner look like Gandhi because he has spent $15.3 billion on Monday Night Football. Like I said, over $25 billion on college football. The NBA deal was enough to make you a Bolshevik. They have just spent money, dollar after dollar after dollar, because they believe that it's all about watching these events. Unfortunately, the NFL, which used to be the crack cocaine of America, has in the last 2 years seen dwindling ratings. And although ESPN's Monday Night Football is up about 5% this year, which is mostly about schedule, it's a problem. So I think part of the reason, though, in answer to your question, Larry, is that Fox has some rights that ESPN doesn't have and that Disney feels are important. And there's a way to somehow put everything together and maybe blot out the competition.
Charlie, you've been in management. You've been program directors at stations. Can ESPN turn it around?
I suppose so, but it would have to be somebody a whole lot smarter than me to do it. Again, I think there's a fundamental divide that has to be crossed. How do you counter-program against immediacy?
But they're still making lots of money.
Oh, I'm not talking financially. I can only talk about what we once presented on the air, what is being presented on the air now. Right. You know, talking about money and stuff, that's well out of my wheelhouse. I just try to earn it. How businesses go about their business when you talk about billions of dollars, I'm sorry, my Bradley education doesn't take me quite there. So I don't know. I can only talk about studio programming where I've had, some experience.
If the trend is such that people go to their phones, is there anything just from a
it goes back to
anything
what I
they
said.
can do? Can you have
it goes back to what I said.
Robots do this.
Journalism is expensive. Talk is cheap. If they want to invest in journalism and counter-program and basically become a nightly, well-researched magazine show, that costs a hell of a lot of money.
Hey, don't forget, though, Guess how much Skip Bayless makes a year? Guess how much Colin Cowherd makes a year? They make north of $5 million a year. Talk ain't so cheap anymore. It was in your days.
Yeah, but it's still less expensive. You got a $5 million a year program, then you throw in another $1 million for production and all of that other stuff. I have no idea what a sports center budget would be today, but I would suggest to you it would be considerably more expensive than the $5 million for 1 hour and $7 million for another hour.
They're not doing a lot of the enterprise journalism, though, that the E60 does it and Bob show outside the lines. But on SportsCenter, they're not.
Right.
They're not looking for Andrea Kramer in the field or Peter Gammons in the field or.
Exactly.
Those days are over.
So that's your dilemma. So what do you do? And the answer is, I don't know.
So listen, CNN paid me a lot of money.
I heard.
They made it back in a month in advertising. Right, in a month, they were now in a profit on a show that was very successful. So these corporate people, they panic. Why Disney's worried about ESPN? We made $1 billion less. Right? I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Well, $1 billion here and $1 billion there. No, I mean,
Everett Dirksen.
Disney cares about what Wall Street thinks. And for many, many years, Wall Street analysts could look at ESPN and say, there was a 7-year stretch. Sorry to get into numbers, but just for 1 second. There was a 7-year stretch where there was an increase, a 20% compounded increase straight for 7 years in terms of what the cable companies, what ESPN was getting from the cable companies. That's a lot of money, 20% every year compounded. So, I mean, Wall Street got addicted to that kind of growth. Disney got addicted to that kind of growth. You know how Walt Disney went out and bought Pixar? With ESPN money. It was like they were printing it. And so all of a sudden now, ESPN isn't delivering those kinds of dollars to Disney, but it's like in Goodfellas. Remember when the guy had the bar and Paulie was like, I don't care, pay me. They still want the money. And so that's why you see now for the ESPN laid off 300 people 2 years ago. They laid off another 100 last year. There's going to be, unfortunately, more layoffs coming. So they're trying to do everything they can to push as much money to Burbank as possible and to convince Wall Street that there's still a growth story. It's tough.
You know, they wouldn't have bought ABC unless ESPN was there.
Oh, ESPN was the crown jewel of the merger.
ABC was valued at $0 in the deal.
The day the deal was announced, I'm sitting with Bob Lee. What year was that? About 90-ish?
1996.
96. We're sitting there preparing SportsCenter that night, and they're having the press conference. Dan Burke and Tom Murphy. We're selling it to Eisner. And Eisner says, and again, we're watching the live feed from New York. We're up in Bristol. And Eisner says, the crown jewel of this merger is ESPN. And Bob looks at me, and I look at Bob. Really? You know, we were in this little concrete bunker in Bristol, Connecticut, which is about halfway between New York and Boston, the way Peoria is halfway between Chicago and St. Louis. And we are now the crown jewel of this, and we were just utterly dumbfounded. We didn't believe it.
Don't forget that in 1990, 20% of ESPN was up for sale, and literally no one wanted it. No, I mean, no one wanted it. The Hearst company wound up buying that 20% only because they had a tax certificate which was expiring that year. They bought it for less than $200 million, that 20%. And you're talking now about a company that delivers over $11 billion in revenue.
When researching your book about ESPN, what was the most surprising thing you learned?
Well, some of what Charley got into trouble here at Bradley, I think, was the... I had his test scores, blood work, tax returns. It was a dark story. No, I think number one was the fact that in 1990, look, if I went in front of a fourth grade class And I said, here's all these TV networks. They get their money from advertisers. And here's this network called ESPN. They get their money from advertisers, and they get their money from cable companies. Who's going to win in the long run? I think the fourth grade class would have figured it out. So I was just blown away by the fact that in 1990, nobody, including, by the way, you know who was selling that 20%? KKR, Henry Kravis, the great investor, the great takeover guru. He didn't want it anymore. It would have been, if he had held on to that 20%, it would have been the greatest Grand Slam of his entire career.
You know who had it right? Ted Turner. We're all sitting here now, and everyone here is paying for CNN and not watching it. You know, it's a license to steal. You're not watching ESPN now. They're getting coin from everybody here.
That's why I say about my mom. She $7 a month at her cable bill. She's never turned on ESPN in her life, but they still get the money.
That's right. It's a way to make money, Charlie. I mean, we're not experts at that, but if you can make money when no one's watching you, it's pretty good. Where did we go wrong?
You got me. When you again, I'm such a dope. When you start talking about money, it just so flies over my head. Give me a microphone, we can talk, we can communicate, we can schmooze. It's a Peoria term. And that's what I do. So when you talk about Henry Kravis, I don't know. My eyes glaze over. I'm just not a business guy.
Simple. Do you watch ESPN?
No.
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 Because you know, why don't you?
No, I'll tell you what happened. You know, I worked at SportsCenter for 14 years.
Wait, can I interject something for 1 second? I don't mean to interrupt you, but so ESPN has been around for 38 years, right? If you were to pick the 14 years of the sweet spot, this guy somehow figured out, he like arrived at the right time and he took off at the right time. I mean, it was the heyday. It was the golden era. It was the trajectory, both in terms of journalistic DNA, popularity, running, I mean, everything. These guys were like legends. I don't think a lot of people, even who watch ESPN today, could tell you the lineup of SportsCenter anchors. But these guys, I mean, and Robin, of course, and Linda Cohn, they were stars.
Again, I just arrived at the right time.
Why don't you watch?
Well, a lot of reasons. One, I was trying to get into that. I've been in this racket now for 50 years, and it started here, over at the Student Center, and then WIRL. And I was on SportsCenter for 14 years. Every day. I had to know everything about everybody every day. And then when I stopped doing it, I closed the door and it was fine. So I read the paper. You know, I will watch an occasional game here or there. I'm not nearly the sports fan I once was. I cover baseball as I used to cover boxing or football. That's my assignment, and I'm focused in on that. And, you know, what Fargo State did to Youngstown State last night, I don't care. I just don't. So it's as simple as that. It's kind of like Earl Weaver. When he left the Baltimore Orioles in baseball, he closed the door and left it behind. So I read the paper, I look online, but am I a sports fan? No. That day ended when I left SportsCenter and then became the Yankee announcer and then subsequently the Dodger announcer, and that is where and how I spend my time and energy.
Anybody reading the paper, Jim?
Reading the paper? I don't think so.
Is that gone?
Yeah, I put a fork in it. I mean, the New York Times just reported earnings last week. Print is like friends and relatives, but the digital growth is way up, and that's thanks to Trump.
And I look at Sports Illustrated's, what, 20 pages or something?
Yeah,
Sad.
Sports Illustrated, the digital presence, and believe it or not, I think more people listen to their podcast than read the magazine.
Can you tell, gentlemen, where it's going? Can you give me ESPN in 10 years?
I have a feeling that I think it's going to be very, very customized. I don't think we're going to have monthly subscriptions to the cable company. What I think, like if you go on iTunes right now and you want to, buy a song, a particular song, you'll go and you click on, you pay 99 cents, and that's it. I think less than 10 years, we can go on our TV or remote control or whatever and pick what game we want that night, and we'll pay for that game. And whoever has it, has it. But I think that the era of these big packages, big cable packages, where people are paying, a couple $100s a month for a lot of stuff that they don't use, people are pissed off. They're done with it. And that's throughout the entire ecosystem of media. We're just unwilling, and nor should we, to pay for things that we don't use anymore. So I think it's going to be very, very customized.
And yet there are a couple other things at play. One, we don't know how it's going to look. It may end up being a hologram in the middle of the room. We don't know how the technology will lead us to whatever place. And the other thing is, not unlike Sports Illustrated or Time or any newspapers, the movie business is shrinking quickly. So people now can watch their movies at home. So how this stuff is going to play out, what it's going to look like, is anybody's guess.
I'm sorry, but there's a really
You can interrupt.
There's a really cool thing that happened. NBC bought rights to the Olympics through 2032. 2032. So that means that the gymnastics team isn't even born yet, because most of those, because they're about 15 years old. I mean, just think about that. But what they did was, in the deal, they put that they have the rights to any technology in 2032 that hasn't even been invented. So that's the nature. The business is moving so quickly, it's so dynamic, that when you're Comcast Universal, Comcast NBC, and you're buying the rights to future Olympic Games, it's exactly what Charley said, which is we have no idea where it's going. So they have to literally write that into contract. Because for all you know, you spend $4.5 billion on Olympics for 2032 for TV, and there's no such thing as TV then. So it was a really kind of artful contract that they put together.
Not unlike in Los Angeles, you may have heard that the Dodgers signed this enormous contract with the then Time Warner Cable, which is now known as Spectrum. $8.5 billion. We get $325 million a year just for breathing. It's a good gig. But the problem is that Time Warner and now Spectrum were supposed to then, where they turned the profit was to sell the rights to DirecTV or any of the others. And it didn't happen. So the bubble burst. So about 40% of the Los Angeles market hasn't seen a baseball game at home unless they buy Spectrum and leave DirecTV. And now, has it affected the Dodgers? Well, they were one game away from winning the World Series. They've averaged 3.7 million fans a year. Dodgers lead the major leagues in home attendance, road attendance, and a lot of pissed off fans in their hometown. Now, is that worth it or not? I think the long-range question is, where are the 5- and 10-year-old kids now going to be regarding baseball in Los Angeles when they're 20 and 25 years old? Because sharing a baseball game with your mom and dad is part of the experience. So that's a question that the Dodgers and Time Warner Cable and Spectrum and DirecTV and all those people, they have to figure that out. But at the end of the day, the Dodgers have been in the postseason each of the 5 years that the Guggenheim Group has owned it. They were one win away from winning the World Series. They're making a boatload of dough. So you be the judge. Who's the winner or loser in all that?
That's also, if you don't mind me saying so, that's a big question for the NFL and for ESPN and everybody else who are going to be bidding on rights to the NFL in 2 years. I went out to Beaver, Pennsylvania, where Joe Namath grew up. It's a great Western Pennsylvania, rich legacy of quarterbacks. And I had been told to go out there and watch this 14-year-old kid. He's 6'1", gorgeous, handsome-looking guy. And I get there in time for him to throw like a 45-yard pass to a receiver who doesn't have to do anything but put his hands out. The ball was perfectly played. the next series, I see him literally, he's 14, he's going through progressions. I mean, half the NFL quarterbacks can't do this. And this, I'm talking to the coach on the sidelines while he's doing it. They said, this kid is so brilliant, he is going to be SEC or Big Ten star. He's going to get a great sneaker deal, and he's going to, without a doubt, be a great NFL star. He's already 6'1" at 14, and just a brilliant arm. I later go on to talk to his parents, and I want to meet his parents, and talking about what a great athlete he is. And they said, we're so glad you could see his last game. I go, what? The coach was just talking about, oh yeah, no. That's it. This is his last game. We told him he can be a starting pitcher or a power forward in the NBA. We're not going to have this kid have brain injuries.
If I could jump in on that, and asking, do I watch SportsCenter and all of that? I did play-by-play for the Generals with a future president as the owner. Jesus. Then I did the Jets, and then I did college football at ESPN, SEC, Big Ten, so on. And I knew how violent the sport was. And I covered boxing for 20 years, and I knew how violent that sport was. In March, I had a sad epiphany. Another one of those CTE stories, former players who are just... Well, the former player was one of my former partners. Dave Herman was his name, and is his name. And he was an offensive tackle, left tackle for the Jets in '69. And we worked together for 3 years. And he's sitting on a couch with his wife. She's doing all the talking, and he's just kind of sitting there and looking at his knee. And it was so heartbreaking. It had finally hit home for me that I personally, I'm not making any judgment other than for me personally, I can't watch football anymore because I know what the residuals are. I know that there are bad knees and there are bad hips and all of that other stuff. But when I saw Dave, who I barely recognized in that interview, it was so heartbreaking. And so I now, on Saturday afternoons, no more college football. Sunday afternoons, I read the paper. And so that goes back to the question, do I watch SportsCenter? No, for any number of reasons. And Dave Herman is as much the reason for that as anything.
If nothing is predictable, why would people invest millions of dollars in something that's going to happen in 2032?
Well, NBC believes that the Olympic brand, that the Olympics as an entity will be around forever.
With terrorism, it could be gone tomorrow.
Well, I personally think that they should have a rotation of just 4 cities, because this idea of cities, look, Los Angeles has the Olympics 2024, and it's going to be an enormous cost in terms of what you have to do to protect a city from terrorism. I think, pick Athens, pick 3 other cities, and rotate, and then at least the city and all the other cities have to, and all the countries have to pay to that host city. But it is becoming very difficult to find host cities. I mean, look, Beijing has the Winter Olympics in 2022. Beijing had the Summer Olympics in 2000. I mean, we're twisting ourselves into pretzels sometimes in order to accommodate this. But I think that they believe, and look, London was a huge success, and if you think about total audience, so was Rio. So I think they believe in the future of the Olympic brand.
And they make money on it.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. They made a lot. I think Rio was their most profitable Olympics ever.
You're talking about NBC. Was it profitable for Rio? Probably not. Was it profitable for Montreal? They're still paying off that one. So betting on the future as rapidly as it is changing in front of our very eyes, and again, I'm not a business guy, seems to be a pretty dicey proposition.
Here's the problem. If you're running one of these companies, what are you going to do, fold your tent and say no? Then what are you going to put on? I mean, think about if any of you were out there running ESPN right now, You're going to say no to the NBA? The NBA is now a world sport. The beginning of the NBA season this year was more exciting for NBA fans than the NFL. So ESPN paid a ton of money. They arguably overpaid for the NBA. But what's the choice? To say no to these things? I mean, it's a very, very difficult situation. And when these NFL rights come up in 2 years, I think, I'm going to be thinking about that 14-year-old, because you're talking about an entire generation now of parents who are saying to their kids, you know what? I don't want you to get into that sport. I want you to find something else. And so what does that mean to the product? When I was growing up, every single NFL team had 3 or 4 stars at least.
Yeah.
You knew every team had 3 or 4. The quality of play now, plus they have Thursday nights, which is just a shamble. The NFL is so greedy. They have to put on games on Thursday night, which means it's awful for the players, more difficult with injuries, impossible to schedule. So it's a real problem. There's a lot of challenges out there.
What about the 500-channel universe? What's that done? All these crazy channels, Axis, EMG, IoT, where's that going? All you need is a little piece of the pie?
Right, it just means that there's more competition for those eyeballs. And, it used to be, you guys are news people. I mean, when the Voices of God, when it was Huntley and Brinkley and Cronkite, and even in the Peter Jennings, Dan Rather era, a lot of people, Dan Rather used to get like a 29 share when he did the CBS Evening News. Do you know the evening newscasts now at the networks make basically zero? They're almost break-even propositions. Because you want to talk about sports, look at news at the networks. They're not exactly money-making operations.
Well, again, folks can go to their telephone. They update their news, what's going on now. So 6:30 is no longer appointment television for Brokaw or Rather
They
or
accept
whoever.
a small screen?
Apparently.
I wouldn't,
Well,
but I'm old.
apparently.
But the millennials don't even. I felt like a dinosaur when my son moved into his apartment because I said, do we have to hang around for the cable guy? And he looked at me like I was an idiot. He's like, Dad, what are you, smoking crack? There's no cable guy coming. We're not buying cable. I got Apple TV, and I got my friend's password for Hulu, and I got this one's password for HBO Go, and I'm not buying cable. They don't even watch it. It's a whole new world. They're going on BuzzFeed, on Twitter, or on Instagram, or on Snapchat to get their news. And that's one of the reasons why the evening newscasts, when you look at the ratings, talk about friends and relatives, they're pretty dim.
This puzzles me, and I've been in the business 61 years. Where the hell is the internet? Where is it? No, don't look at me strange. Where the hell is it? People take out a box, and the whole world is in that box.
Well,
There's no
where
internet office.
There's a guy named Phil.
A guy named Phil in there.
Phil.
In a basement.
I mean, where the hell is it?
Cranking out tons of crap.
It's amazing to me.
Well, listen, I mean, it is so vast, and it's just, there's something for everybody now. And everybody knows where to get it. And by the way, not to get too lofty, but it's part of what divides us, because we're all able to get news from wherever we want. We're able to create our own world of information. And so if you were to look, I don't want to get political except for one in the context of this. If you looked last year, Trump voters were getting all their information over here, and Clinton voters were getting all their information over there. We have, what the internet has done and what media has done is it's enabled us to have exactly what we want, but it's totally divided us. When in the 50s, when I Love Lucy, when Lucy was pregnant, that commercial break, the water levels in the major cities in the United States went way up. Everybody used the bathroom at the same time. We were all watching, we were all sitting around watching, because that's what we did as a country. Now there's nothing like that at all. So we're increasingly divided.
There is no Ed Sullivan show anymore. There's no one show that we all have to watch on a given day or a given night. It's different. The landscape has changed, and if anybody can figure out where that landscape is going to lead us, good luck.
How do you think the small sports networks will do?
The who?
Like the small sports, like Fox Sports 1, FS1.
Well, again, they have to fill programming somehow, and how are they, again, you're asking me business questions that I don't.
But they
But I
were pretty
respect
smart.
you, Charlie. You're a learned man.
Nah, it's overrated. No, seriously, I don't know. I don't delve into the business side. Give me a story to cover. I can do that reasonably
All
well.
right, how well will the FS1s do?
Look, they put the divisional baseball playoffs on FS1.
Yeah.
So did you know, like, the number one Google question for a while there was, what channel is FS1 on my cable system? But they had the
But now-
last laugh because
but
they
now-
had the divisional
but now,
playoff.
Jim,
But
you
now
could-
they may know it, right?
Exactly.
You can detail this better than I can. When ESPN2 went on the air, and how are you going to fill 24 hours on one, let alone ESPN2? And the first time I think we had a Duke, North Carolina game that Steve Bornstein said, all right, we're going to put the biggest college basketball game of the year. And I don't remember what year it was. And we're going to put Duke, North
1993.
Carolina, 93. And exactly how many millions of people saw that? But the point is that suddenly the brand was able to expand because most of the country didn't get ESPN2.
But they got
But
a lot of phone calls.
the next day, all these cable companies around the country were getting requests, demands from viewers. We want ESPN2. It was one of those great gambits that paid off. And again, that was the beauty of Bornstein.
How many channels are there on ESPN now?
6.
6.
I believe 6 or 7, maybe.
And they're all making money?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. I mean, ESPN Classic changed. They got rid of ESPN Classic. But ESPN International, ESPN Deportes, they've been...
So corporate America scares me sometimes. So we didn't make 10 billion, we made 9 billion, so we fired 300 people.
That about sums it up.
Why? Because the stockholder counts more than the employee?
Well, it is. I mean, look,
Is
Wall Street...
ESPN different than any other business?
I hope there are some family businesses where the guy on the assembly line is as important as the guy who bought the stock. I hope.
I think that's Finkel's hardware store on Main. I mean, there's not too many. Not too many.
Not too many.
Not too many.
You know, one of the things that again, when we were part of that explosion at Sports Center, late 80s into around 2000 or so, there were a lot of really talented people, many of whom Jim kind of mentioned in passing, who have been victims of layoffs. And the thing that gets me to my core and bothers me even as we speak is that those people who gave 20, 25, 30 years of their life to make ESPN and SportsCenter what it was, they were cut in order for mediocre NBA players to make $25 million a year because they had to be paid from somewhere, and ESPN paid those rights fees. And in order for those NBA players or NFL players or Major League players, whatever it is, soccer players, in order for them to get their money, it has to come out of somebody's hide. And it came out of the hide of a lot of the people that taught me how to do what I do. And the day of that, what I called the mass execution, 300 people who were the heart and soul of that place. And they had to go. They had to go. And again, it's one of those things that to my core, knowing how good and talented and hardworking they were just victims of this 21st century economy. So the question is, shareholders, yeah, ESPN and Disney and all that, no different than any other place. They just happen to be on TV, and we got killed.
Are you good at predicting?
Well, I did win 26 bets on Trump last year.
Are you optimistic about all this or pessimistic?
Well, by nature, I'm pretty optimistic. I think it's really interesting. I think it's a really interesting time because 20 years ago, you kind of knew the equation. So if you were in the business, you kind of understood the ecosystem and you went ahead and executed it. There's so many uncertainties out there and there's so many independent variables that I just think that for people who are running these companies now, or for young people who are going to work in these companies, how do you survive? Who's going to come up with the next great idea? Who's going to be like Mark Zuckerberg in a dorm at Harvard or any place else, coming up with a great idea? Who's going to captivate our imagination? And I think that one thing is for sure is that we have proven ourselves to be incredible. We have an incredible appetite for content. So people consume content. I mean, that's why we're all looking down on a phone. Have you been to games lately? Do you realize that everybody screams but they don't clap because everybody's holding their phone? I mean, it's an amazing thing. When I was growing up, everybody would be clapping. Everybody's just talking and cheering, but they're not clapping because they have their phone. So one of the things that we've learned in the past 10 years of this whole experiment is that, if you build it, they will come. And so I'm curious about what's next.
I learned something today from Andy McCullough, who's the beat writer for the Los Angeles Dodgers. He's 30 years old. He's really one of the great young writers in the country. And we were talking about the old days after a game. We'd go to the clubhouse, we'd sit, and we'd talk with the players. And in the old days when you smoked a cigarette, drank a beer, you'd be in the clubhouse 2-3 hours talking baseball. And I said to him that this day and age, these players are fundamentally not that interesting because they live with their thumbs on their phones. And I asked him, so what gives? He said, well, that is now how they communicate. And so the interaction that we as reporters and players used to have, where you would sit and talk and spend all sorts of time, that doesn't exist anymore. It's now, this is how they communicate. So having any direct verbal interaction is really like pulling teeth. And I didn't realize that because I don't go to the clubhouse much anymore. I happily go to the booth, get ready for the game, call the game, and go home. But it was, because I said to him, it's just not as much fun in the clubhouse anymore. And here's a kid who's 30, who's anywhere between 5, 6, 7 years older than the young players that he now covers. He said, it's the issue that we have. There's very little interpersonal reaction between media and player because these kids have grown up with their thumbs on their phones.
It took me a year to figure out that my 17-year-old daughter just texted with her boyfriend. They don't actually talk. So I think I'm actually okay with that.
Yeah, and they're at the same table, which is really kind of problematic. But so this whole phone thing has fundamentally changed everything about how we view our news, our sports, live our lives, communicate. And today I was really dumbfounded when Andy talked about, well, I can't talk to these guys either. I can tweet with them better than I could talk to them.
My son, 18, good-looking kid, went with a girl for 6 months. Never saw her. Never saw her. They met, and they met texting, texted every day of their life, and broke up texting.
It's an effective means of birth control, that's for sure.
No, I interviewed Steve Jobs when Apple started. I predict that phone you have will have sex.
With another phone?
With another phone, of course.
Oh, that's romance. I got an iPhone. Hey, I got a Galaxy.
I got it. All right, what we're going to do is, we've done 50 minutes. It was scheduled for an hour. We'll probably go over a little, but we'll take some questions. If you raise your hand, I'll point to you.
Is this on?
and he'll find you. Okay, we start over here. You can address it to the panel or to any individual.
Hi, I definitely want to go ahead and ask you guys, what inspired you, and if you have a favorite quote, what would it be?
For me, I was 7 years old, actually I was 6, when the 1955 Brooklyn Dodgers won the World Series. And I lived on Long Island, and my neighborhood had nothing but Brooklyn Dodger fans who had finally beaten the Yankees 2-0 in Game 7. And there I am, my mom and dad and folks from the neighborhood, grown-ups, they are crying. They're crying because they're happy. I used to cry when I fell off my Schwinn and scraped my knee. So I didn't understand what this passion was all about. And then I started to listen on the radio to Vin Scully, who is the Babe Ruth of my business, and that's all I ever wanted to be when I grew up. I guess the quote that I go by, and I've used this here before, it came from my mom. I was one of those hideously underachieving high school kids. You know, I got C's and B's when I should have had B's and A's. And one day she just got fed up with me. And she said, "You want to be a schmuck your whole life?" But above and beyond that, what she said was, if you give 100% of yourself, 100% of the time, and it doesn't work, you've done the best you can. If you give less than 100% of yourself, 100% of the time, and it doesn't work out, it's your own fault. So that's, I suppose, if there's any one quote that I go by and live by, it came from my dear old mom.
What inspired me was, I was 5 years old, and I'd listen to the radio, and I was fascinated by radio. I don't know about you, Jim, with print, or I just wanted to do that. I would imitate radio announcers. A program would end, I would go into the bathroom and recreate what the announcer said. A tale well calculated to keep you in suspense.
You went into the bathroom for the echo, for the bottom,
sure.
So you sounded like an announcer.
I worked in a building where WOR was on the 1440 Broadway.
Yeah, I worked there for 10 years.
Well, when I was young, 17, 18, I worked at Associated Merchandising, which was on the 4th floor. Mm-hmm. I'd take the elevator up to the 20th floor where WOR was, and they had elevator operators. I'd get on the elevator, put my hand over my ear and say, "Lobby, please," and pretend I was an announcer. I pretended my life. Because I'm living out what I dreamed of walking down the street in Bensonhurst as a kid. My friend Herbie's father, Herbie was in the Army, and he used to walk around with me, and he used to say, what do you got, pipe dreams? What do you, come to work in my factory. Someday you'll be a foreman. What are you going to be, Arthur Godfrey? Pipe dreams, pipe dreams. And all the pipe dreams came true.
And my mom said, you know, if it doesn't work out, you can always go to work for your father. No! That was all the impetus I needed.
What was your inspiration?
Well, really, this is third place, because my dream, I always wanted to be shortstop for the Phillies, and I played baseball for 11 years, and I was never good enough, so forget about that. That was my first attempt, and the second one was I grew up in a very politically active family, and I always wanted to be in politics, and then I figured out I couldn't ask people for money, and we were really poor. If I had been a member of the Lucky Sperm Club and had a big family fortune, I would have financed my own campaign, but so politics went by the wayside, so thank God I could write.
So it was third.
Third.
Anybody else? Gentleman back there. Gentleman over here.
Oh, by the way, my favorite quote is, Noah built the ark before it started raining.
First of all, today's been spectacular. Please come back next year.
I had no other plans. Thank you.
And I guess my question for Charlie is, what is a boy from Long Island, why Bradley?
There were a couple of reasons. One, I was born in Long Island. My mother was a issues at play. Let's remember it was 1967 and we had that little thing called Vietnam. And so I was pressed with a choice, Peoria or Phnom Penh. I opted for Peoria. But more seriously, Bradley, for whatever reason, garnered an awful lot of attention in New York, and it probably began with the point-shaving scandals in the 50s. And over the years, into the 60s, when it kind of got itself out of the doghouse, the New York Times would give an inordinate amount of attention to Bradley basketball. Oh, this is kind of neat. And I remember there was one black and white photo, of course it was all black and white in those days, of the field house and the white Bradley uniform, and of course it was the red numbers, but you didn't know it was red. And it just looked neat. And again, going back, this is all I ever wanted to be when I grew up, was the Dodger announcer. I figured if I could come to Bradley, I might be able to call me a couple of games. And that is how it happened. And in the late 60s when I was here, and even before I got here, there were an awful lot of folks who came from New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Much more so then than now. So when I got the opportunity and was accepted here, I jumped at it, and 5 minutes after I arrived on campus, I walked across the street to the college radio station. I said, folks, I'm going to be here a while, and that was it. So that's how a Long Island kid ended up in Peoria and loves coming back.
Next. Over here.
This one's for Mr. Miller. With the ESPN social media policy that they've been putting in, and just that aspect of ESPN's trying to kind of corral their personalities, do you feel that's going to be successful at all, or is that just another slippery slope that they're on moving forward?
Oh, it's a slippery slope, all right. Look, it's a difficult thing. ESPN seems to get into more trouble with their social media, their personalities, than other places. But it turns out that a lot of ESPN personalities don't consider themselves public figures. So they think that when they're tweeting on their own, they can say whatever they want. It turns out that ESPN doesn't believe that. So one of the things that they did last week with the social media guidelines was to make sure that every single employee of ESPN, whether they have a Twitter account or a Facebook account, Instagram or whatever, everything that they do and say publicly, they are responsible for conforming to the guidelines. And a lot of ESPN personalities right now are thinking and believe, hey, wait a second, that's not fair, because that means that I can't express my own opinions. And ESPN has decided to say tough, because they don't see an alternative. It's one of the reasons why when Jemele Hill tweeted that she thought Trump was a white supremacist, who would have thought that was a controversial tweet? You know, it was a big deal. And she was reprimanded, not suspended, but then later suspended for being perceived to advocate for a boycott.
See, that's an issue that simply did not exist when I was there.
Should sports reporters be allowed to,
they want to,
have their own opinion?
I personally do not have a Twitter account. I will, pardon the French, I will drink a shot glass full of shit before I have a Twitter account, because I don't fundamentally care about what I think, so I need to share that.
But
do you consider yourself a public figure?
What's that?
Do you consider yourself a public figure?
I suppose so.
Did you consider yourself one when you were at ESPN?
I suppose so. I didn't give it any thought.
Would you fire someone in management if a on-the-air reporter tweeted about Trump?
Again, I don't tweet.
I know you don't. I'm asking
I don't care. Should they do it? If they want to, fine.
Or should it impair their job if they do it?
That's an interesting question, because I still have to convey the news of the day. Sports is not exactly news, but sports and news is now beginning to morph into one. So you're not purely a sportscaster anymore. Hell, that 6 o'clock Sports Center that we used to do is now, I don't know what it is. It's some cultural attempt at stuff that, again, bears no resemblance to what we did. You know, I was there 14 years. I'm out of there 15 years. I'm a part-time consumer of their product, so I don't know. And fundamentally, the social media scares me because too much bad stuff can happen with it.
Do you think sports reporters can have opinions on their own without affecting their job?
Nope.
You don't?
Nope.
I think they should.
They have to, look, they're working for a company. If they don't want, and the company is a public company, and they have to be responsible. And they also have to be, look, one of the things that I thought, and I said this to Jamel, when you give such a pronounced political opinion, it's almost unfair to your colleagues, because then what happens is ESPN is known as this ultra left-wing liberal institution that's out of step with a lot of the country. And you know what? That's not fair to do to your colleagues either. So I think that it's a Faustian bargain. When you decide to become a personality at ESPN, just like journalists at NBC News or whatever, we don't want to know what they think personally, because it's just not, it's not fair.
It should not interfere with the delivery of the news of the day. And if it does, then fine, go work somewhere else.
Any other questions? Over here. We'll take a few more. Hustle.
Relax, you don't have a flight till tomorrow morning. Where are we gonna go?
I'm hungry, I'm hungry.
I'm hungry.
I'm Jewish, I'm hungry.
So Disney has been in talks about creating a live streaming service that would give not only Disney products directly to consumers, but also ESPN. So Jim, could that help ESPN on the business side? And Charlie, could that also help them on the storytelling side to reach consumers and avoid the problem of the telephone, because they could give their content directly to the telephone?
Yeah, I mean, look, cash equals truth. They're throwing a lot of ideas for future revenue streams up against the wall, and they want to see how all of you deal with it and what you're going to do with it. So OTT applications are a big part of their future.
What the hell did you just say? I have no idea.
I have no idea either. Next question, over here.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
So being like a college freshman, studying, communications and everything, you guys are saying like a lot of stuff is shrinking, like within TV, film and everything. What's a way to, make yourself stand out, to get your foot in the door, to be successful in the business?
I think it was Woody Allen who may have said, be there. Just be there. Be at that radio station. Be at that newspaper. Be at that event. And the very first panel we had this morning was all about what are you going to do with your degree? Or as I prefer to think of it, how are you going to make some money in this profession? And it's so fundamentally different now than it was when I started, when you went from Peoria to Davenport, New Haven, Hartford. You went to bigger markets, and hopefully you got snared up by somebody else. That's all changed now. And I don't know, I really don't know the answer to that, and that's really one of the big issues within our school.
I'll give you one. No matter what's going on 20 years from now, just like it happened 1,000 years ago, somebody's going to have to write something. Somebody's going to have to tell a story. Artificial intelligence is this big, big thing, and it's taken over this, and it's taken over this. And yes, some computers can write stories, but writing and communicating and being able to tell a story, whether it's a fiction story or a nonfiction story, I think is the most critical element for success. Because if you can do that, somebody's going to want you to do it for them.
Showing up is what Woody Allen said is great. Showing up is half the game.
Yeah. And work harder than the next guy or woman. Because, again, one of the things I tell the folks, nobody's going to come knocking on your door and say, hey, will you come work for us? It doesn't work that way. You have to knock on their door and show them that you're more than equipped.
And get used to knocking on a bunch of different doors, because my grandfather got a watch when he retired because he had been at the same place 35 years. You're going to have 7 or 8 employers. You're going you're going to work for 7 or 8 probably different companies, but you also may go through a 10-year stretch where you're working for yourself, where you become incredibly entrepreneurial and you've figured out a way to monetize your own skill sets, and it may be just from your house. Who knows? But the idea of finding that magic bullet, of being recruited by that one company and then staying with that company forever, chances are infinitesimal that that will happen to you.
I got time for one more. Where's our guy? Okay.
I just wanted to know, because I know a lot of people lose their inspiration once they into a field or a business for so long. What keeps you driven to continue to do what you do?
Oh, you mean what keeps you going? Every day is new to me. In this field, there's nothing like broadcasting, nothing like reporting.
How about 3 kids and an ex-wife?
Every day is new. When the camera goes on, as the jockeys say, when the man says go, that bump still occurs. Still love every minute of it. Still love it from the first day to today.
Each day is new.
Yeah.
And you start with a blank slate, and by the end of the day, hopefully you got a pretty picture, and then you do it again tomorrow. And in the case of a baseball season, we just finished 177 games, and people are counting down the days till spring training. There's no hurry. There's still, this is now the time for us to enjoy the off season. But point being that every day something new is going to pop up, and we are fortunate enough to write about it or talk about it or do play-by-play about it. And business notwithstanding, it ain't a bad way to make a buck.
It beats work.
Yes, sir.
Beats work. One more?
One more.
Right here. The sponsor asks the last question.
Thank you for being here. Look at the lives you've touched all day long. And we didn't have those opportunities, Charlie, where we saw the career unfold in front of us. So thank you for making this possible.
Thank you.
Are the ESPN discussions, the canaries in the coal mine, and at the 8th Steiner Symposium, we're going to talk about the rise and fall of the NFL, and then the NBA, and the gargantuan salaries and the lack of ability to fund those ever-increasing dollars from whose pockets?
Don't know. I mean, that's, again, when I got here and when dinosaurs were grazing over at Bradley Park in 1967, we had, I think, 4 radio stations, 3 FM stations, and 3 television stations. Who could have possibly imagined that, A, this industry would become what it has become, B, when I got here, there was Broadcasting 101, and if you were really lucky, Broadcasting 201. That was it. So to begin to figure out where it's going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, who knows? Cable television was community access television in 1968 in Broadcasting 201, and it was an idea, a concept. And so now we're talking about telephones, counter-programming to television networks and regional networks, none of which ever existed before. What it's going to look like from now, who the hell knows?
It's a wild thing to cover. You know, I live in the sports media business, and it's a wild thing to cover when not a lot of people know what is true and what is going to be happening. I mean, I was 6'4" and blonde before I started doing this. I mean, this is just, it's kind of crazy that there's so much uncertainty out there. But in a way, it's invigorating because we're like literally at that moment. We're at that inflection point now, technologically speaking, and I think even socially, where everything is changing so quickly that every day it's something new. And, you know, I like it because when you write about it, you can be highly disruptive. And you can challenge people, and you can be provocative, and as long as you back up your thoughts with meaningful statistics and some information.
And 50 or 100 years from now, when we're still doing the symposium, and I hope still to be here, we may look back at this time as the Gutenberg Bible. Everything has fundamentally changed. and where it's going. Who knew when they first started the printing press where these words would go and how they would be read and disseminated and year after year after year? So what's going to go on 5 and 10 years from now? I hope I'm here.
Sometimes I'll close with a true story. Simple things don't change. Vince Lombardi, the great coach of the Green Bay Packers, true story. One Sunday, the Packers played a terrible game. Lombardi was very upset, and he ordered a team meeting in pads Monday morning. They had to be fully dressed. And he assembled the entire team. And he said, the coaches and I have stayed up all night to look at yesterday's game. And we have decided we are dealing with the stupidest bunch of men we have ever coached. You are like junior high school students. This is embarrassing. We can't put up with this. We're going to begin from the beginning. We're going to start like it's all over. He picked up a football and he said, this is a football. And Max McGee said, don't go so fast. Thank you all very much.
Hey.
Good night.
Thank you, panelists.